The knock on Avaline Summerville's cabin door came like a spark in dry grass. Sharp, sudden, impossible to ignore. She froze where she stood, hands still covered in flour from kneading bread. For a heartbeat, she wondered if she imagined it. Years of silence could trick a lonely mind into hearing things. But then the knock came again, steady and sure. Her heart raced. No one ever came out this far. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch. The hot Wyoming sun pressed down on the prairie, the tall grass rattling like warning bells. Dust swirled behind a rider, just now pulling his horse to a stop. A man swung down from the saddle with a practiced ease, tall and sun-browned, his blonde hair tied back and his eyes bright with mischief. He leaned one hand on the porch post like he'd stood there 100 times before. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, voice warm and rough. "Name's Crispen Bywater. I hear you sent for a man." Avaline's stomach flipped so hard she almost lost her breath. I didn't exactly," she stammered. "My cousin," she wrote on my behalf. "That's so," he drawled, grin widening. "Well, no need to fuss. Happens more often than you'd think." He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of sun, leather, and faint sage. Her hands twisted in her apron. She hadn't had a visitor in months, much less a man like this one. Before she could gather herself, he hooked his thumbs casually in his belt. "But before I set foot inside," he said lightly, "best we agree on terms. A fella like me don't move without conditions." "Conditions?" she echoed. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm clean, I mind my manners, and I work hard. If you need chores done, I'll do 'em. If you need company, I can talk. And if you need—" He paused long enough that she braced herself. "Help riding from the back of a saddle? Well, I can do that too." Avaline choked on air. "From the back?" His grin turned wickedly amused. "Horseback, ma'am. I meant horseback. You've got yourself a bold imagination." Her cheeks flamed so hot she felt dizzy. "I am not bold," she blurted. "Sure you are," he teased gently. "You just don't know it yet." She swallowed hard. "I only need help with chores, that's all." His expression softened immediately. "Then that's what you'll get. Honest work. Nothing improper unless you ask for it, and it don't sound like you will." Avaline found herself letting out a nervous breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Come in," she said quietly. He followed her inside, removing his hat respectfully. The small cabin felt even smaller with him in it, his presence filling every quiet corner. She tried to busy herself with setting out supper, but her hands shook. Crispen sat at the table, warm eyes roaming over the room. Not judging, just noticing. The patched curtains, the mended chair, the worn Bible on the shelf. Finally, he looked at her. "You live out here alone?" "For 2 years," she whispered. "Since my father passed." He let out a long, low whistle. 2 years is a mighty long time for a woman to be alone on the frontier. She didn't answer. He studied her a moment, then asked gently, "No brothers? Husband?" Avaline hesitated. "I'm engaged," she said softly. "A traveling trader. His name is Marmaduke Fenwick." Crispen almost dropped his coffee. "Marmaduke?" he repeated. "Poor man. Sounds like he was born with that disadvantage." Avaline shot him a sharp look, though her lips tried not to twitch. "It's a family name." "It's a burden," he said, grinning. Her small laugh escaped before she could stop it, and Crispen's eyes warmed at the sound. But when she added, "He hasn't written in 6 months," his smile faded. "6 months?" he echoed. She nodded. Crispen leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice gentle. "Ma'am, men who want to come home find a way, a letter, a traveler, a telegraph. Silence ain't delay." He paused, its distance. Avaline felt her throat tighten. She looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. "You don't know him," she whispered. "No," Crispen said. "But I know lonely women. And I know men who make 'em wait." Her breath shook. He seemed to sense he'd pushed enough, because he stood, rolled up his sleeves, and carried his dishes to the wash basin without another word. His strong hands worked with gentle care, washing plates like it was second nature. No man had ever washed dishes beside her before. "Why do you do all this?" she asked quietly. He didn't look up as he answered, "Because I've got a mama back in Ohio and 9 siblings who need every dollar I send home." He scrubbed a plate. "Because I'd rather work for lonely women than starve back east. Because I chose a road most men wouldn't, but it keeps my family alive." Avaline stared at him, feeling her heart shift in her chest. Not because of the work he did, but because of the man he was beneath it. Later, as he dried his hands, she found herself blurting, "You can come back tomorrow if you want. There's firewood that needs splitting." His smile was slow and warm. "Then I'll be here at noon," he said. "And ma'am, you make a man forget he's supposed to be charming for pay." When he left, the cabin felt emptier than it had that morning. For the first time in years, Avaline wasn't waiting for silence. She was waiting for him. Crispen Bywater became a steady rhythm in Avaline's life before she even realized it. Every day at noon, she heard the same sound. The thud of boots on the porch, the clink of his tools, the soft whistle he used when he worked. Her cabin, once silent and hollow, now felt alive. He fixed the sagging porch step, mended fences, cleared brush, hauled water, and split firewood so easily it looked like the axe was part of him. And while he worked, he talked, stories that were wild, ridiculous, and warm. He had a way of making her laugh without trying, a sound Avaline hadn't heard from herself in a long time. One afternoon he was fixing the barn door, while Avaline stood nearby with a jar of lemonade. The sun lit his hair in soft gold. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked. Avaline looked out at the dry prairie stretching toward the distant hills. "No," she said softly. "This is all I have left of my father." "You got more than land," he said, glancing at her with those warm blue eyes. "You got time. You're 20. You could start over somewhere new." Quote, "I'm waiting for Marmaduke," she reminded him quietly. Crispen wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. "Ma'am," he said gently, "a man who disappears for 6 months ain't waiting on you." She stiffened. "You don't know him." Crispen didn't argue. He didn't push. He just nodded and went back to work. But she heard the unspoken truth in the air between them. That night, Avaline found herself lying awake, thinking about the man sleeping miles away in Denver, who sent letters like they were bills, and the man who worked on her porch every day, who saw her, spoke to her, made her feel less small, less invisible. 2 weeks later, Crispen arrived with a story so absurd she nearly dropped the bucket she was carrying. "And I tell you, that dog chased me half naked through a cornfield," he finished, hammering a loose board back into place. That widow laughed so hard she nearly fainted. Avaline covered her mouth as laughter spilled out of her, bright and unfiltered. Crispen looked at her like that sound was the best thing he'd heard in years. "You're not so shy as you pretend," he said, smiling. "I am," she insisted, cheeks pink. "No," he said quietly. "You've just been alone too long." The words hit deep, honest, and unsoftened. Avaline looked away, her throat tight. That evening he stayed for supper again. They sat by lamplight, the small cabin warm with the smell of fresh bread and stew. Halfway through the meal, Crispen's voice dropped. "Avaline," he said, "can I ask something?" She froze. "What? Do you truly want that man back, or do you just want to stop feeling alone?" Her spoon stilled. Before she could answer, he leaned back in his chair, giving her space. "Either answer is fine," he said gently. "I just want you to be honest with yourself." Avaline didn't sleep much that night. Her heart was torn between what she had been waiting for and what had quietly, steadily begun to grow. The next day, while she was kneading bread dough, a rider approached fast. Avaline stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. The carriage was black, polished, expensive, so out of place she forgot to breathe. When the door opened, a man in a crisp gray suit stepped down, boots shining. "Marmaduke?" she whispered. He smiled, the same formal smile she remembered. "My dear Avaline, I told you I would return." Her heartbeat stumbled. She was covered in flour, hair falling from its bun, sweat on her brow. He looked like he belonged in a city ballroom, not her dusty yard. "I wasn't expecting you," she said quietly. "No," he said, stepping closer, "but I find one must move quickly when business opportunities arise." He followed her into the cabin without waiting to be invited. His eyes lingered on everything: the patched curtains, the rough-hewn table, the mended chairs. "So," he said, taking off his gloves, "we must discuss our future." He spoke for nearly an hour, of Denver, of investments, of a house he had already envisioned. He spoke of selling her land, of profits, of sensible choices. He spoke of everything except her. No mention of her safety, her loneliness, or the 2 years she spent waiting. Just business. Just plans she had never agreed to. While he talked, Avaline realized something heavy and painful. Marmaduke did not love her. He loved an idea of her. A polite, quiet woman he could fit like a puzzle piece into his plans. Her hands trembled as she poured him coffee. "Your property," he said, tapping the table, "is worth $2,000. With my Denver venture, we can triple that. You understand, we must act quickly." Avaline opened her mouth to respond, but then boots hit the porch. Crispen walked in, arms full of firewood. The moment he saw Marmaduke, he paused. "Avaline," he said softly, "you all right?" Marmaduke straightened, eyeing Crispen like he was dirt on his boots. "And you are?" "Crispen Bywater," he replied calmly. "I work here." "You may leave," Marmaduke snapped. "We are having private discussions." Avaline swallowed. She looked between the two men, one polished and sharp, the other sun-worn and quietly solid. "Crispen," she said weakly, "maybe." But her voice faltered. Crispen read the conflict in her eyes. "I'll be in the barn," he said gently, "if you need me." Quote. And he stepped out, but not before giving Marmaduke a steady, warning look, a look that said he would not leave if she asked him to stay. Inside the cabin, Marmaduke continued speaking as if nothing had happened, as if Crispen were no more important than a passing shadow, as if Avaline's life belonged to him. Finally, he clasped his hands together. "We should marry soon," he said briskly. "Pack your things. Denver awaits." Avaline's breath caught. She didn't know what she wanted. She didn't know how to say it. "I need time," she whispered. Marmaduke's smile thinned. "Time?" he repeated. "Avaline, don't be foolish. You have been waiting for me." Her voice trembled. "I was waiting, but I changed." He stared at her, as if she'd spoken a foreign language. "Avaline," he said sharply, "be reasonable." Her heart beat so hard it hurt. "I want you to leave," she said quietly. "What?" His voice cracked. "I need time. Alone." Marmaduke's jaw tightened. "Fine," he snapped, "but I expect a proper answer when I return." He stormed out, slamming the door. Avaline sank into her chair, shaking so hard she could barely breathe. Moments later, Crispen reappeared in the doorway, concern written all over him. "Avaline," he said softly, "what happened?" She lifted her tear-filled eyes. "I don't know what to do." He knelt beside her. "Yes, you do," he said gently. "You just don't want to say it." She closed her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to leave. I don't want to marry someone who treats me like property." Crispen's hand hovered near hers, not touching, waiting. "Avaline," he said softly, "you don't owe that man your life." She opened her eyes. "Why do you care so much?" she whispered. "You could work anywhere." His jaw flexed. His voice went low. "Because you're the first woman who ever looked at me and saw a man, not a reputation." Her breath caught. The truth settled between them like a final card placed on a table. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was choosing. The next morning, frost clung to the grass. Even though the sun was still low and warm, Avaline stood on the porch, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she'd barely touched. She felt hollow and full at the same time, scared and steady, shaken and strangely clear. Crispen approached from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. He paused when he saw her face. "You didn't sleep," he said gently. "No," she admitted. He nodded once, stepping beside her but not touching. He never touched unless she made the first move. something she noticed more now than ever. "You don't have to decide today," he said quietly, "even if Marmaduke expects it." Avaline looked up at him, the morning light catching in his eyes. "I think I already have decided." Crispen stilled. "And what's that?" She swallowed. "I don't want a life where my choices are made for me." And Marmaduke, he didn't ask anything, he told. Crispen nodded slowly, eyes gentle. "So what now?" Avaline drew a shaky breath. "Now I wait for him to return, and I tell him the truth." He studied her face. "You sure?" Quote. "Yes," she whispered. "I can't keep waiting for someone who never truly saw me." Quote. Crispen didn't smile, didn't celebrate. Instead, he reached out and covered her hand with his gently, carefully. "I'll be here," he said quietly. "Whatever you choose." Marmaduke returned 2 days later with the same polished carriage, the same polished boots, the same polished expectations. This time, Avaline stood straighter. "Have you come to your senses?" he asked, stepping down. "Yes," she answered, "I have." He relaxed. "Good. Then pack." "I'm not going with you." Marmaduke's smile froze, then cracked. "What did you say?" "I said I'm staying. This is my home. My father built this land. I'm not selling it." His jaw tightened. "Avaline, this is foolish. You cannot survive here alone." "I'm not alone." His eyes narrowed sharply. "Ah," he said coldly, "the hired companion." His voice dripped disgust. Crispen stepped out of the barn at that exact moment. He didn't approach harshly or rush forward. He simply walked toward them with calm, steady steps. Marmaduke's face twisted. "You think a man like him will give you a respectable life? He's a companion, a wanderer, That's enough," Crispen said, his voice low. "What will you do?" Marmaduke snapped. "Fight me?" "No," Crispen said, standing tall and unshaken. "But I'll tell you the truth. I'm not pretending to be anything I'm not. But I don't lie to women. I don't leave them waiting years, and I don't talk about their homes like they're banknotes." Marmaduke glared at Avaline. "You'll regret this." "I already regretted waiting," she said simply. He stared at her a moment longer. Then, with a sharp turn, he climbed into his carriage and drove away, dust swirling behind the wheels until he disappeared over the rise. For the first time in years, Avaline felt air fill her lungs without weight. She turned to Crispen, but he was standing still, looking at her quietly, almost uncertain. "What now?" he asked softly. Avaline stepped closer. Her voice trembled, but not with fear. "I want a life that feels real. I want someone who sees me, someone who stays." Crispen's eyes softened in a way she had never seen before. "And who's that?" he whispered. "You," she said. He didn't move at first, as if he wasn't sure he'd heard right. Then a breath left him, shaky, relieved. "Avaline," he said softly, "are you sure? You know what I was, what people will say." "I'm done letting my life be shaped by what people say," she answered. "I want what's honest, and you are." He finally reached for her then, his hands warm and careful as they closed over hers. "You're choosing me?" he murmured. "Yes," she said, "if you'll have me." He laughed, a quiet, disbelieving sound, and pulled her into his arms. "I'll have you," he whispered, holding her tight. "And I'll spend every day proving you made the right choice." They married a week later in Bitter Creek's small white church. The pews were packed with curious townsfolk. Honora stood proudly by Avaline's side, chin lifted like she dared anyone to comment. Crispen wore borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit, but he stood straighter than any man in a $10 suit. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, half the congregation sucked in a breath, but no one spoke. When they stepped outside into the sun as husband and wife, Crispen lifted her right off her feet. "You sure?" he whispered in her ear. She smiled, tears burning her eyes. "Yes." That night, inside the quiet cabin, the two of them stood together in the lamplight. Crispen took her hands gently, as if she were something fragile and precious. "You don't ever have to rush anything with me," he said softly, touching her cheek. "We'll write our story slow, the way you want it." She nodded, heart full. They leaned their foreheads together. The lamp flickered. The night settled warm around them. And he kissed her, steady, deep, careful, full of promise. Not hunger. A slow, tender kiss that made her feel seen, chosen, safe. When the kiss deepened, he whispered against her lips, "Tell me if you want me to stop." "I don't," she whispered. And the night folded gently around them as the lantern dimmed. A soft, warm fade into a future neither of them had dared to dream. The years ahead weren't easy, but they were theirs. Crispen became a storyteller in Bitter Creek, turning his wild past into tales folks paid to hear. Avaline transformed the homestead into a thriving farm. Together they built a life with laughter, hard work, and a love so steady it held through every storm. Children filled the house. Joy filled the land. And the shy woman who'd once waited for letters that never came found a partner who showed up every single day. Many years later, they would sit on their porch in the golden light of evening, their children grown, the prairie quiet. "Do you remember what you said the day we met?" Avaline would tease. Crispen would grin, eyes sparkling. "Which part?" "When I asked you if you liked it from the back." She'd swat him with her apron, laughing. "Crispen!" "What?" he'd say. "I meant riding horseback." And their laughter would drift across the grasslands like a promise kept. A promise of a life chosen, not waited for. A life built from truth, courage, and love that outlasted every whisper, every shadow, every storm on the wild frontier.